Welcome, friends. My name is Byron Belitsos, and I'm co-host with Dr. Glen Martin of this next in our series of the 2024 ECI podcasts. And today we have kind of a gathering of the elders of the tribe, two prominent members, both of whom are academics. And I should say that all of us are actually elders. So this is like a conversation of elders, all four of us. But our special guests are Richard Sharp, Dr. Richard Sharp, and Patricia Murphy. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a moment, but I want to say just a couple things by way of prefacing this discussion and to update everybody about what's happening kind of on the ground with our work. And first is, and most important, I think, is we've just announced what we call the World Democracy Campaign, and that's a subject for discussion today as well. And this is a campaign mainly to gather the partners who could be in coalition with us. And they can be two types. Type one is called convener, the convener coalition, and those are serious organizations seriously interested in our work or our kind of work, who are World Federalist organizations who more or less ratify or endorse what ECI is doing with the Earth Constitution. So that coalition is now in formation, and we are very happy to say we have several important organizations that have joined with us in this campaign. They have already been with us, but a few additional ones who have not been formally with us are in serious dialogue about being part of the coalition. That's called the Convener Coalition. So that's the spearhead of this campaign. They're the ones that will set policy and make decisions. In fact, they are raising money as a group. De facto, the funds coming in will go into the work of the coalition. In addition, there's going to be a second coalition that we're calling the Supporter Coalition, and that's any organization interested in our principles, that agrees generally with our philosophy, but may not necessarily every detail, and may not necessarily ratify the Earth Constitution, but respect it. And so they would be coming along in this campaign as supporters. They will not be in the main meetings, although they can observe our meetings, so not be voting members, but they would be cohorts working with us to make this thing successful, and we're hoping and inviting them to come to the PWP 16, the Parliament of World, the World Parliament of what is it, Glenn?
Provisional.
So the other part I wanted to say, and then I'll turn over to Glenn to make prefatory comments also, that another emphasis of the campaign is to ensure that all of us are working on creating districts, world electoral districts, in where you live, and to the extent possible to try to become an activist on the ground to do that. And as many of you know, we've founded here in Washington D.C. the District 118, and Patricia, who's with us, and I and David Gallup founded it, and we do have meetings. So we're encouraging, and we want to speak to that a little bit today. So now I'm going to turn it over to Glenn to add anything he would like by way of introduction.
Well, thank you, Byron. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here with this podcast. I've known Richard for a number of years, and Patricia we go back way far. Patricia and I used to work for International Philosophers for Peace together, and she's been at meetings at our place at the lake in the Adirondacks of New York State, where we're been planning world peace ever for a long time. And so it's wonderful to see her. We've been on peace marches together and in Washington, D.C. and so on. And I met Richard through Patricia. Richard came down to our house here in Radford, and he was very thorough. He wanted to check us out, and we hit it off, and that was not long before he moved to India and showed himself to be a true world citizen, true international citizen. and I visited him in India, where he lives at one point a few years ago. And there he was playing a drum with a band, and we were having a great time. And
We're
it's
dancing.
wonderful, wonderful cultural expression and energy there. So it's really nice to have Richard, who has been a longtime supporter of the Earth Constitution as well. So, Byron, you're the main moderator, so you could begin to ask questions.
Well, first, I'd first like to ask Patricia to introduce herself, and then ask Richard to introduce himself, and then I'll come back to our first question. So go ahead, Patricia.
Okay. I'm Patricia Ann Murphy. And I have an undergraduate degree from here in Virginia at George Mason University, and then went on for my PhD to Temple University in philosophy. My undergraduate is in philosophy and religion. I suppose I was trying to reflect about my beginning in terms of thinking about things of the peace sort, and I realize, this is almost embarrassing, but my initiation was during the time of the MX missile. That's how old I am. That became a kind of clarion call for me. I've worked in many different respects and capacities and with organizations ever since. I've just finished a 40th year of teaching at St. Joseph's University, where I've taught a number of different kinds of philosophy courses. And I am also a certified philosophical counselor through the American Philosophical Practitioners Association. I have, just always done whatever I can. I've been part of Episcopal Peace Fellowship, American Friends Service Committee. I've worked for them. I have currently, just last week, actually, I felt honored to be able to hold the red banner around the Pentagon for 2 miles as we protested the events in Gaza and requested that we have a ceasefire. I go to conferences and presentations. I believe, I'm uncertain when I met Glen, but I believe it was in the early 80s. We were both. I was one of the founding members of International Philosophers for the Prevention of Nuclear Omnicide, founded originally by John Somerville. I can remember some wonderful world parliaments of philosophy that Glen and I participated in, some meetings of international philosophers for the prevention of nuclear omnicide. So I write papers and teach, and currently work with homeless people. And that's, I don't know what more to say. So I'll
That's
leave
a
it.
lot. It's impressive.
Oh, I do want to say one thing. I'm very thankful that to speak about my current work, which is I've recently been working a lot on the notion of moral injury. I am preparing a paper for the American Society of Value Inquiry, which will be presented at American Philosophical Society in January 2025. So.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you, Patricia. So over to you, Richard.
Yes, my name is Richard Sharp, and I was a professor of American literature for about 30 years, different schools in the DC area mainly, including George Washington. And I started at Howard University and then ended up at Catholic. I also worked at the Library of Congress quite a while, and was teaching part-time at that point. When I was approaching retirement, which was around 2012, I decided to apply for a Fulbright fellowship just because I wanted to get out of town, basically. And they call Washington a negative vortex, and in some ways it is, you know. So I wanted a new frame of mind. So I was lucky to receive a Fulbright, and I went to teach in Kolkata in West Bengal. And I was teaching peace studies too, I should say, mainly American literature, but I also teach peace studies. I always have. So it might be interesting for me to share how I got interested in, or how I became a pacifist. And that's very easy, actually. When I was graduating from Oberlin, I went to Pendle Hill, which is the Quaker Study Center. I had started going to Quaker meetings in Oberlin, and I had a very good counselor there who helped me put together my conscientious objector statement, which happily was accepted by my draft board in Akron, Ohio, which is a particularly liberal community. I shaved off my beard and everything. And yeah, so I got it, and I worked in alternative to military service. I worked in University of Washington Hospital as a nurse's aide. My wife, the woman who became my wife, was entering the PhD program at University of Washington. So that worked out really well because, I don't know, I believe in national service. I think all young Americans should give back 2 years to their country, because maybe they want to serve in the military if that's their choice. But I mean, there's so many things to be done in this country, you know, that everybody could find something that they would enjoy doing, I think. So then I came back for 1 year in 2016 to get a new visa. And Patty, I had known Patty for quite a while at American Friends, Friends Meeting of Washington. So she told me happily about WCPA and Glen Martin's work. So that's how I got interested. And when I went back to India at the end of 2016, I think the first conference I went to was in Pune, which I think was a preparatory provisional parliament. Didn't break up into committees or anything, but that made a huge impression on me because Pune is a small city, and we had two venues. One was their new campus, which was outside the city. Quite interesting. In fact, they had this enormous domed edifice that was to all world religions and supposed to be the largest dome in the world. That made a big impression on me. And then the main conference took place in the main campus in Pune, and we all gave presentations. So that was my first experience with WCPA. And I was really, after reading the Earth Constitution, I thought this is the most amazing document I've read. I used to teach Universal Declaration of Human Rights in my composition classes. And I see that the Earth Constitution surpassed it. We went, you know, into our ecological rights, our right to a clean environment, healthy environment, and our right to live in a world without war. Those seem to have gone beyond Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So, yeah, I was very committed at that point.
Well, Richard, you just answered our first canned question, so I'm going to address that question now to Patricia about your impressions of you. I know you've been to at least one provisional world parliament.
Mhm.
And would you be kind enough to give us your impressions of being at a parliament like that?
Well, I am as you know, not an easy person, and typically take a few years to study things before I commit to them, which is certainly what I did in the case of the World Parliament. Glen became most active in the idea of the World Parliament, and through our association with International Philosophers for the Prevention of Nuclear Omnicide, I began to learn things about it. And I also must say that as early as, again, the early 80s, when I was casting about for a text for one of my moral philosophy classes, I feel I was extremely fortunate to have found a book by James Sturba entitled Morality in Practice. And that was really the first philosophical text that I had seen that tried to put together all of the component pieces: the economic situation, the environmental situation, the political situation, and the whole moral dimension. So I am very thankful to have encountered that at an early period of time. So I was very interested in the World Parliament, but I did not sign or attend until the conference in Tripoli, Libya. That was my first instance of World Parliament, which I can't remember, was 2005, 2006. Glenn, do you know?
2006.
It was 2006. And I have been to, I believe, 2 others since that time, both in India. And I was looking at some of my notes and finding there was one in 2010 in Kolkata, which I attended, and one in 2000, the last one, the 15th, was in Delhi, India. And what was I was so impressed about was, well, the camaraderie and the sense of being able to participate now in what is a coming event, which will be the actual ratification of the World Parliament. But it feels so important that people understand they can start creating the legislation for that and talking about the issues and the import for what the world needs. So I was, again, looking back at some of my notes, and I noticed that there were legislative acts, I think, I honestly don't remember how many at Libya, but I was especially remembering the interest in learning that the nation of Africa had an all children's Congress, and they had been invited to meet with us to express their desires for particular resolutions for us to take up. They were requesting that we do enact legislation to lessen the impact and the of malaria for children all over the world. And I thought that was extremely wonderful and important to have witnessed that and be there. And not to mention the fact that some of our elders, more elders, were still in evidence at that time. And it was so wonderful to actually sit and discuss issues for legislation and to raise objections and corrections and editing and things like that. Just such a sense of the fact that we can do something now to prepare for the betterment of the earth. I think everybody knows I have a real problem with despair. Okay, but I feel like the notion of the Earth Constitution and actually the possibility of being present at some of the provisional world parliaments has given me the hope and stamina to continue on. So I guess I have participated in 3. I look forward very much to the 16th Provisional World Parliament, which I believe will be in Pondicherry, India, which is, of course, very near Oroville, which I have a great liking for that whole notion of a world community. So I don't know. I think that's about it for me.
I just want to follow up. I think Patricia expressed so beautifully the sense that we have in the sessions of the Provisional World Parliament that we're actually doing something for the future, something that's grounded in the present, but its vision is clearly the future, a world that's entirely different than our present world. And this capacity for us to do this is there in the last article of the Earth Constitution, Article 19. So the Earth Constitution lays out this beautiful document on how the world can govern itself in freedom and justice and sustainability. And then in Article 19, it tells us that here and now we can begin laying the foundations. It's called Provisional World Parliament, Provisional World Government. And that's what these sessions of Parliament are acting under. They're acting under the authority of the Earth Constitution in doing this.
Yeah. And as soon as 25 different countries ratify it, it will become, in fact,
that's correct,
world parliament. So it's, you really get a sense of participatory justice. And I've met so many wonderful people through the various meetings that we have had and the planning sessions that we have had, that I find it an enormously beneficial and hopeful thing that I only wish more people were aware of and could participate in. So
if I could just say one thing, talking about our elders, 2 men that really impressed me. One was Swami Agnavish. I went to Sonipat, which is the home of Jindal Global University. We had 3 conferences there, I believe. I attended all 3. And Swami Agnavish, to me, was a quite unusual person. I mean, I told him even once, he reminded me of Martin Luther King, not in his personality, but in his courage and the profundity of his wisdom. I really was moved by him. I'll never forget him. And also Shantinath Chattopadhyay, who I hope is still living, but he kind of, because of age, has kind of moved beyond his organization, which was called the International Society for the Intercultural Studies and Research. And we've had many like shared conferences there. Like there was one recently at Ramakrishna Mission in Calcutta, and another one at Sri Aurobindo Ashram in Calcutta. So he was a great man also.
Yes, I agree with you about both of those great elders. And I too was initiating, I was requested by Dr. Shantinath Chattopadhyay to be part of the the forming of ISISAR. Back, I think it was 83, if I'm not mistaken. So, and he has been just a very devoted and very committed to the idea of world parliament and world government, as is very consistent with this sense of values that he has. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. I think we've covered that very well, and it's inspiring for me, kind of a latecomer to the PWP process, to hear how profound it was for you to be there. And that's not really come across necessarily, in the accounts I've heard. So thank you again for that. And maybe we should move on to another question, a little bit more difficult one, having to do with your perceptions of the world situation right now and our relationship, our being ECI and WCPA, how you see the difficulty that we face, which is we don't have much name recognition. We have these meetings that are important, but they're not noted in the world press. We're not being taught, necessarily in classes, unless it's your classes. And the books that Glen puts out are profound, but not that many people see them. So, all this stuff combined means we're in a very big conundrum. And I want to see how you'd like to address, from your point of view, how you see that. Right now. So maybe start with Patricia, if you like.
Well, I think it's rather tragic, having the burden of the long view and having felt for so many years that we have this opportunity of the world parliament and a sense of planetary justice and the possibility that things could be so much better. And again, I go way back to things like Buckminster Fuller's notion of the world game. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but so, I mean, he had ideas in which he knew he could redistribute all of the resources over all of the world so that there could be, no starvation, no drought, no this, no that. So I guess the newer incarnation that I look to for that is the world parliament. But it, as the years go by, it gets concerning that, and I personally feel too many people are too distracted and not listening and not understanding. I was speaking with a friend earlier today and saying, when I look at my kids, and it hasn't been forever, but it's been about for the last 20 years, my students, I feel they are actively grieving. They understand the earth is harmed irreparably. And I think that is having an effect on them. I think that and plus the distractions of the screens that they have been brought up with means, unfortunately, they're just, not thinking about other possibilities and restorative justice and ideas of peace and things like that. Certainly, in terms of the environment, the youth have maintained an important and great presence. But other than that, I mean, I think there's really a sense of grieving. I think they understand the world is in crisis in many different respects. And I fear that informs too much of their sense of hope and action. So I find that very, very troubling.
I wonder, Patricia, if the idea of an idea that whose time has come has influence on that or your thinking or their thinking, because the world is rapidly seems to be getting worse in terms of
Oh,
climate,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
in terms of the possibility of nuclear war, with the war in Ukraine for
Mhm.
2 years now, and war in Gaza and so on. And, is there, do you think there might be a moment when human beings begin to wake up and say, we need to do something totally different? We need to change the way we're governing this planet?
Well, I like to hope so, but I often despair about that possibility, I mean, and I think it also has to do with the current nexus between the environment and the university system, in which much education has been commoditized,
Hmm.
and the environmental situation. And it almost seems too much, I was saying to another friend earlier today that here in Johns Hopkins, which is up the road, we have been having demonstrations for the last 25 years at their graduation to protest the fact that they are the recipients of enormous, many more times, like 50 times the amount of money from the government for weapons development than any other university in the United States of America.
Hmm.
We've been doing that for 25 years, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's listening.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is very difficult to, but of course I hold out hope, and things like that, but it's very difficult. I find
Yeah.
almost overwhelming sometimes.
But we're of course we're trying to turn that around, and
Of course, I understand that. Yeah, I know.
this World Democracy Campaign is what we have come up with as a kind of strategy to see if that can be turned around, right? Because we're trying to build now a coalition of convener groups and supporter groups, and build a
Mhm.
real movement, so that the Provisional World Parliament 16 is going to embrace peace groups and environmental groups and people from around the world, hopefully making a historical impression that the media will recognize.
Mhm.
We're doing our best, but we don't, no one knows, of course, how it's going to turn out, for sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
So Richard, do you want to speak into that question about, despair and the difficulties that we face and, the crucial moment that we're in?
Well, I think it's a personal issue in a way. I mean, I see despair as a temptation, and I have to resist it. And playing in a musical group, as I did pretty intensely for 2 or 3 years after I stopped teaching in India, was a tremendous boost to my spirits, I have to say. And then COVID came and kind of ended that. Then I started writing a book, which is just about finished, on American anti-war, pro-peace poetry. And as I say, when you put it all together, there are about 150 poets and I don't know 200 some poems. It's so powerful. It's a powerful condemnation of the war machine, and it goes back to the Mexican War. My book goes through the Vietnam War. But I'd like to, when I finish this one, continue to the rest of this last century and into this one. So that keeps me going, as well as everything else, like my passion for nature and my love of music and my friends and family. I have an Indian family, though I'm not married. I've been adopted. And there's a little boy, he's turning 10. He's like my godson. And we have this amazing sympathy. It's hard to explain, kind of mysterious. As well as my own son and my grandson, who's 16. I saw him yesterday, and he's very smart. And I haven't really talked to him about his concerns, but he's very excited about going to college. And I don't know. You can't give up hope.
Right.
It's not possible.
Mhm.
You can't live.
Rick- Yeah,
Mhm.
Richard, does your book cover Walt Whitman? I know you're interested in him. Uh, but you know, he's not only anti-war, but he's got this tremendous spirit of the possibilities of our human condition. Yeah,
And understanding the environment as well.
yeah,
Yeah, he's my favorite writer in any language and
Really?
in
Great.
American. Yeah, because he touched me when I was very young, and not in school, but my brother was in college. He's ahead of me, and I noticed on his bookshelf was Leaves of Grass. So I started reading that, and I thought, wow, it kind of he speaks to the reader directly.
Mhm.
I don't remember another writer that does quite that. So I remember in Pune, I discussed and read most of his last great poem, Passage to India, where it's more than just about it's philosophical, but he didn't despair of the modern world. He embraced the Industrial Revolution and the modern inventions, and he thought the telegraph and opening of the Suez Canal, for example, these were, of course, he saw them as metaphors. He saw the world coming together, and in the future, and that we would return to the garden. You know, he talks about the Garden of Eden being in Asia, and that we would come full circle and recognize all humanity as our brothers and sisters.
Mhm.
Great.
And that's a sentiment that I find in all of Glen's writings and in the whole instantiation of the Provisional World Parliament, you know, that it is all interconnected and that it will improve. Mhm.
Yeah, and even I imagine he would be embracing the digital world as well as a great hope also. So yeah, his tremendous optimism is, I find, very inspiring still.
Mhm. Mhm.
We should adopt him as the antidote to despair of this moment.
Oh, there are a lot of poets who could help us with that.
yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Who else? What other poets, Richard, would come to mind in that connection?
Well, one of the greatest, I think, is of the Spanish-American War, Stephen Crane. He's known more for his novel Red Badge of Courage and short stories about the Civil War, which he never participated in. But he wrote maybe the greatest poem, anti-war poem by an American called War is Kind. It's such a bitter condemnation of war that it's definitely one of the very best.
Mhm.
Randall Jarrell and in World War II, and I mean, I could go through each of the wars, but I mean, Randall Jarrell, he wrote The Death of the Ball Turret Gunner. It's often anthologized about this innocent guy who falls into the state, quote unquote. He's drafted, and because he's small, he becomes a turret gunner, which means he's underneath the plane and firing at the attacking aircraft. But when he comes back to base, they find that he's been massacred, and they have to wash his body out with a hose.
Mhm.
So, and he wrote a lot of other popular, great war poetry, maybe the best of World War II. But I had a mentor at University of Santa Cruz, his name was Brother Antoninus, who became William Everson, and I was a TA for him, and I think he wrote the greatest, how should I put it, conscientious objector poetry, because that's what he was in World War II. There are a number of these poets who were conscientious objectors, and on and on. I mean, it's quite stunning when you put them all together.
One other question about it: who was the poet that you find most profound during the Vietnam era?
W.S. Merwin, I think, he didn't write a lot of poems, but the ones he wrote were just, like mind-blowing, like the Asians dying.
Mhm.
Yeah, he wrote 4 or 5 really powerful poems. I mean, you don't have to write 100.
Right.
Write 4 or 5 that you go right to the heart of the question. Denise Levertov wrote some really great anti-war poems in that era. I also have a chapter on poets who protested nuclear war, and a chapter poets who are conscientious objectors. And then I end with a chapter I call Visions of the Great Peace. These are poets going back to the 19th century who imagined a world, a peaceful world. And some were, of course, religious. Others were political, like world federalism, I guess would come under that. And some were establishing peace through other spiritual means, not necessarily religious, and active service, compassionate service. I talk about Whitman there. His poem, The Wound Dresser.
Mm.
He was a volunteer nurse in Civil War.
Mhm.
And then it ends with nature as an inspiration for world peace, and well as poetry itself. I think that's that I like that chapter because it goes beyond anti-war to
Mhm.
visions that these poets had of a world
Mhm.
of harmony.
Mhm. And actually, I recently learned that you, Byron, have a history of Indian poetry interest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, I studied with Everson at Santa Cruz also. I found out yesterday talking to Richard. And I was going to be his teaching assistant if they let me into the literature program, which he was in as well. So we almost crossed paths. But I studied mainly with Allen Ginsberg, who, of course, was an anti-war poet himself. And his work just rings out, particularly his anti-nuclear war stance that he took in this famous poem, which we were talking about yesterday, called Plutonian Ode. But I don't think that's in the book because the book ends at the Vietnam era, right, Richard?
No. I have a separate chapter on anti-nuclear poets.
Oh, so you do have that poem in the book.
Yeah, it's a powerful poem. I love that.
Yeah, it's a great poem. So I studied with Ginsberg when he was writing that poem and when he first performed that poem in protest on the railroad tracks, the tracks that led into the nuclear installation that they were trying to shut down. So I was present for that and did write my own anti-war poetry as well. And
Rocky Flats, it's called Rocky Flats.
Rocky Flats, absolutely. And his work inspired a lot of junior poets like myself, around that same thing. So yeah, I've been. In fact, we were thinking, Patricia, having Richard come and read, or have one of us read from his forthcoming book at our district, which is a good idea for a district, is to have, not just going to have bureaucratic discussion. You're going to talk about cultural issues and political issues and philosophical
Absolutely.
issues.
Yeah.
And we should do that.
And I guess one of my favorites, and we have had sessions in Calcutta devoted to poetry in some of our planning meetings for the World Parliament. One of my favorites is Edna St. Vincent Millay and Conscientious Objector. And I did want to just, mention to folks about the legislation being considered last week to make not a registration automatic. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. And it's not bad to start thinking more about conscientious objector. I just listened. I had to give a paper in Timisoara, Romania last June. And I just learned that very many of the Ukrainian young men are fleeing to Romania right now to avoid having to go to war. And, it's just such an abiding abiding problem.
So Glenn, I wanted to ask you, since Percy Shelley said poets are the legislators of the world, can we have some poets go to the PWP and read some poems and maybe pass some legislation?
We haven't done that before because the form, the formal structure of it is formulating and passing and voting on and discussing legislative acts, so we have a World Legislative Act that founds an authority to protect the oceans. And we have another one that eliminates nuclear weapons, and we have world legislative acts that are about economic equity for everyone. But that's an interesting thought, maybe poets should have a role in PWP 16. Why not, Patricia? What?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, you're talking about the individual legislative acts, that in fact, we have passed more than 50 individual legislative acts over the course of the Provisional World Parliament, which I think is just, wonderful. And there are many more in preparation right now. So.
I move that we take all of the funds now being used to produce nuclear weapons and have a legislative act that would be a fund for poets through the world and songwriters. They can apply for grants.
Yeah.
Minimum size grant is 100,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just heard yesterday, I had shared this with Richard, that the budget for the United States for nuclear weapons refurbishment, replacement was $91 billion, I think, this year. And which is more than all of the 8 nuclear countries combined. It's insane. It's absolutely insane, especially when there's such enormous social need in our country. So.
I've written some anti-war poems myself, but I have no skill in poetry. But a friend of mine, Elaine Webster, and myself, last year we came out with a book co-authored called Invocations of the Heart.
Oh, really?
And so there's several of my anti-war poems are in there.
Oh my gosh.
One I wrote after visiting, the first time I visited Hiroshima. I wrote a poem about that.
Yeah, I remember reading some of your poems. You just have to work at it a little harder.
That's right. I have to.
Well, you have too much to do.
But your instructor right there.
That's right. Maybe I can enroll in one of your classes, Richard.
I do a lot of things with Code Pink here in DC and World Beyond War. And last summer, World Beyond War actually offers writing classes, especially devoted to issues of peace. And I took one last year. So, I mean, they do have a lot of practically applicable things. As the American Friends Service Committee runs classes to assist people in learning how to talk to their representatives in Congress. So there are, some concrete things people can be thinking about and doing.
We may move on now to yet another question for the group, and that is, all of you have been professors, instructors of undergraduates and graduate students, and what would you like to say about youth today, being that you've spent so much time and so much of your work and your life with young people, where they're at? That was broached earlier, I think, by you, Patricia. How would you characterize the mindset of youth now in regard to our work, and whether there's a way to a prospect for reaching them?
I think there is an audience. I think it varies a great deal according to what area of the country you're in and what kind of university you're referring to. But I think we've seen a great testament to that in terms of the recent protestations against the economics for funding the current situations in Israel, Gaza and Israel. So I have some hope for that, but I also feel, and my experience teaches me, that it is not universal in terms of youth. It is, very spotty, I would say. I don't know why that is, but I do think it's, hopefully it is an audience that we can reach and that we must reach, really, to continue on for the hope of the World Parliament.
I think it might vary from country to country also,
Mm.
we were last spring, Phyllis and I were in Mexico. I gave a lecture at the Central University there in Mexico about the parliament and so on.
Mhm,
And there were a lot of young people in the audience. They seemed very much engaged and concerned, and then we went to Venezuela, and Venezuela, as you know, is seriously blockaded by the United States. There's a civic energy there, they have this tradition of local government, and a lot of women are in the local governments around, the town councils and so on around Venezuela, and they're visionary and they're progressive, and I think they're really, some of them that we encounter were really interested in our work for.
Oh, yes, yes. And I think a recent case with the ICC was brought by the youth of a single country.
Right.
Charging them with a violation of their human rights because of the situation of the environment. So, there are pockets of very great hopefulness, I think. Yeah.
Richard?
Well, I think a lot of people would agree with me that our species is tending towards world democracy or world fascism. And it seems like it's going, that's where it'll end up. I don't know how long that would take, but I think young people are aware of that. So those, I think, that already have an active conscience and haven't been, I like that phrase, moral injury.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that in regard to people with PTSD. But yeah, I think the whole generation is probably suffering from a kind of moral injury because we all have a conscience, but pay attention to it or not, So I think, I don't know, as I've seen the 60s, which was the social revolution I was a part of, one wonders how it started, but it just took off, and it's like the whole generation, not the whole generation, it's never 100%, but usually it starts out as 1 to 10%, and then, of course, others just tagging along. But I think there was a profound change of consciousness, as we used to say in the 60s, to a higher consciousness. That realization that life is not about getting a job and making as much money as possible before you die. That life is serious, life is earnest, that we have responsibilities to other people, not just ourselves and not just our families, but the whole human family. And I'm hoping too that somehow there'll be a great awakening across the planet, and young people certainly get the ecological issue. It's one of the two existential issues we're confronting. The other is hyper-militarism, threat of nuclear war. So they don't, for some reason, I'm a little puzzled by that, why they're not more concerned about militarism, and that either one of these wars that are raging now could go out of control and end up as a nuclear conflict, which is exactly what we don't want. And yeah, I haven't taught in a while, so I'm thinking of maybe returning to teaching in India after my book is finished. So I think it does vary from country to country. And we have Martin Luther King in the United States, and India, of course, has Gandhi. So when I taught peace studies there, I emphasized the similarities. How Tolstoy, another great peace warrior, he talked about the war against war, influenced Gandhi, and Gandhi influenced King, and King influenced the Dalit movement, the Black is Beautiful concept in India. So these cross pollinations, I think, are really inspiring. So to me, it's a matter of getting the word out. That's why I thought, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, we were trying to open a global media center in Delhi. And for some reason, it didn't get off the ground. But now we have a website, but you think anyone interested in world peace would discover that? You know, why do we have to reach out to everyone? If this is an idea whose time has come, which it clearly is, you know, more people should be finding us, it seems to me, without our trying. I'm puzzled by that.
Well, that actually leads to one of the final questions that I think you're going to pose to us, Byron.
Yeah. Having to do with hope for the future.
Well, and also what we may see as current problems. You know, one of the problems I think that's happening is there is so much information on the web and many conflations of different ideas of the World Parliament and of the principles involved.
Right.
That I think it has become problematic, you know. I think there is some high degree of unclarity between what I think of as the pure understanding of what the World Parliament is, as I see presented in Glen's works. I mean, Richard, you spoke about changing of consciousness, you know, and that's all an additional level within Glen's understanding of what is happening with humanity, you know, and taking it to a spiritual realm. So, you know, I think the waters have become somewhat muddied. And there have been a number of people associated with the idea that I think are more detrimental than they should be. I don't know if that's, you know, as a philosopher, simply reflecting on human nature, but I believe it has occurred. And I am very sad for that. There's a lot of correction and editing and replacement that needs to be done in terms of the web presence about the whole idea of the World Parliament and WCPA and ECI and, you know, all of those things. So
I saw something positive just this morning. Last week, I read an article that was bemoaning the fact that people were not outraged by the possibility of nuclear war, which is increasing, you know, with a war in Ukraine and so on. And it mentioned the 1982 march in New York City, which which had 1 million people in Central Park. I was there. I was part of that.
I was too.
And we didn't know each other then, I don't think. But then later this morning, I saw one of the videos by Scott Ritter. You know, Scott Ritter is a prominent spokesperson for peace and the ending of the war in Ukraine and so on. And he said, we're having a 1 million person march in Kingston, New York, this September 28th.
Oh,
Be there. And he said,
okay.
and wherever you are in the country, get out there in your town square
Mhm.
and we'll have a coordinated nationwide march against nuclear weapons on September 28th. So there's a hopeful sign if this takes place. Well, in
Mhm.
fact, I'll be there if it happens, I'll be there in Kingston, New York
Yes,
today,
that's,
September.
that is hopeful. The other action I recently heard of that I have a great deal of hope in is on the 23rd of June here in Washington. There is a combined Quaker and Buddhist Peace Fellowship, which is creating a silent march. Everyone is to meet at the Smithsonian Castle, 3 to 5 p.m. and walk down the mall to the Capitol. And I think I like silent things. I think they're pretty dramatic. So I want anyone here, I hope will consider being part of that action. So
Eddie and I used to hold a banner at the Capitol. It was on a Sunday, right, for 1 hour?
Saturday, 1 hour. I came in years, I think 17. And I did that for 7 years. And then COVID hit and it went away.
I really enjoyed that, though. You wonder, how is this going to make a difference? But something about standing with a banner that said "Seek peace and pursue it"
Mhm.
from the Psalms, I guess,
Mhm.
and to hold that banner in front of the Capitol, you wonder how many people saw it. Could have made some impression on someone.
Mhm.
Little things, I think, are often what it takes to build a revolution.
Mhm.
Yeah, many little things, and then suddenly there's a catalyst, a turning point.
Right.
Something new shows up.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been in these demonstrations since the 60s, and I'm a little bit despairing actually about it. I think what it's good about it is for the people doing it, certainly it raises their consciousness and educates them in a lot of things. But it's like the powers that be are obviously not listening to this. They maybe we can say Richard Nixon maybe turned a corner, at a certain point because of demonstrations. So I mean, there's good examples, but right now I don't see any impact on government from all these demonstrations worldwide against the war in Gaza. But I could be wrong. But I think what we have to, our job is to, not just inspire young people to be against something, but what are they for?
Mhm.
We are remiss, in my view, in
And
not doing that.
yeah,
And
I think the World Parliament is a perfect antidote for that,
right.
and something that they can do now.
So somehow I think maybe we can, in closing, maybe speak to this is that, when we're forming a coalition that's a spearhead for the peace movement as well as other movements
Mhm.
that is focused not on what we're against. I mean, obviously we talk about, these maladies, but focused on a solution that gives people hope, that inspires them to come out, that gets wealthy people to fund us. And, if I were wealthy, I wouldn't fund an anti-war march at this point. I just wouldn't do it. I would fund something constructive that
Mhm.
actually puts in authority the people of the world, that
Mhm.
actually has the infrastructure for a governed world. And so that's a kind of appeal I think we should be making. And so I want to turn this over to you guys if you have any thoughts about that, since we opened with that. And any final thoughts? Any of you? Or
Specifically, what do you want us to talk to?
how would you advise us? We're the elders, all of us, but how would the two of you, our special guests, how would you advise Glenn and I, because we're in this day to day? how would you advise us to get this World Democracy Campaign off the ground? Right now, we don't have particular funding. We have a pretty good idea. We got some people supporting it that are significant. But any thoughts in closing about, or just inspirational ideas, to keep us motivated? Anything you want to add?
Patty?
I feel embarrassed to say I'm not sure what to advise. I think, and I have heard Glen say that he is going to work as hard as he possibly can to bring about world government and to promote the World Parliament. And I certainly can echo that.
I think maybe broadening our communication to include spiritual organizations,
Yeah.
churches, and of course, not the fundamentalists, but the more open-minded, liberal-leaning churches and synagogues and temples, and the Buddhists are always there.
Right.
And there's a peace tradition in Hinduism also.
Yes.
And I think that would be a way of uniting the world, actually, because spiritual people believe in something. Maybe you can't define it. You don't have to use the word God, but there's, I don't know. I guess I have a kind of a mystical side. I have an apprehension of something larger than me and larger than us. I think living in India I've evolved a lot because I like all the religions that I studied, and I think they're all true and they're all beautiful and they're all meaningful, and they all have a mystical core, and that is this intuition of a higher power, or however you want to put it. I think that would be one way to bring the world together. But maybe we haven't emphasized that enough.
That's excellent.
Yeah, very good.
Glen, can we give the last word to you on that question to just kind of cap this off?
Well, I think that what Richard was saying is correct, and Patricia is agreeing that we can appeal and we should appeal to spiritual organizations and religions and so on, because what ultimately this is all about has something to do with the cosmos, right? The cosmos has produced us. And we are this incredible creature who have logos, we have intelligence, we have self-awareness. And to live in a cosmos that has produced this miraculous creature called a human being, who has not only the logos and intelligence, but as Richard was saying, the sense of the mysterious depths of things. We are as Sri Aurobindo says, we are the cosmos who has become conscious of itself in us and wants to use us for its purposes of realizing a world of harmony and coherence and justice. And so there's something about what we're doing that has to do with the whole meaning of the universe, and through that the meaning of human life. And I think that's behind what the people that wrote the Constitution for the Federation of the Earth were feeling that as well. I knew some of them personally, and they were incredible human beings. So, I'm just delighted, Richard and Patricia, that you've been here with us, talking with us. It's really been enjoyable, and I thank you both for being here and coming and sharing with us.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for a memorable time, all of you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.